This is Mark Fletcher, and welcome to my world. Welcome to Southern Tales, Tall and Otherwise. This week, we're going to slide outside the white lines for just a second. We're going to talk about some other stories and situations that set up some of the future stories and situations and craziness and all the good times and wild times, bad times and other times we want to forget, and sometimes we have forgotten, but we still have these stories. So I guess the point is, this episode might not be quite as linear as the others. Sit back and enjoy. So I guess I want to start off by just saying, growing up in my family was tough. Maybe growing up in every family was tough, but I always had the feeling that mine was a little tougher than others, and that could be right or wrong. But, you can judge that for yourself. Don't get me wrong. I'm pretty proud of my heritage and most of my family. I say most because, as all of you know, every family is a bit dysfunctional, some more than others. And ours was not any different. I'm going to try and avoid most of that dysfunctionality, but eventually the day will come when we really need an interesting episode. And let's face it, what's more interesting than dysfunctionality? I mean, think about reality TV. So why was it tough? And I think it's probably because my dad grew up poor, or at least he said that, and it seemed like that was probably true, during the Depression. And I don't think, they had a whole lot. His was tough because he lived in a tough neighborhood. It was a poor neighborhood. And a lot of the reasons was because his father was kind of a road dog. I mean, I think his father bagged groceries at the corner store. But whenever he got a chance, he was going to go off to gamble on the horses or throw the dice or whatever it may be that was the popular way to lose money those days. And so life was tough on those rambler gambler types and their families. But when I was a little kid, I had brothers who were much older than me. I think the oldest was 16 years older than me. And I had two older and even had an older sister. And all of them, I think, could make me cry whenever they wanted. And I remember one day I might have been crying a tear or something. I'm 5 or 6 or 7 or something. And I asked Pop, I said, hey, why couldn't I be as funny as them? What is it about them that's so special that they can be funny and tell jokes and everybody laughs at them? And he told me, he said, listen, one day you will. You just got to experience life, and that'll do it for you, and you'll be just like them. And he was pretty right about that. But let me tell you, kids in my family rarely got a break. Oh, my older sister was tough too. She was 4 years older, but she was pretty street smart. I can remember she always referred to me as Toots. I'm not sure if that was good or bad. But you had to be street smart in my family, and she had no pity on me. I remember that time we were fishing at Number One Pond, which if you listen to the Tony episode, I'd never caught a fish there. Well, everybody caught a fish, including her. And of course, I didn't. I'm 7, right? So maybe I wasn't expected, but in my family, you were supposed to be successful. She was street smart. I remember one time we were at the laundromat, This is before everybody had a washing machine in their house. But in this laundromat, they had one of those Tom's candy machines, where you put a quarter in it and you pull the knob and a brownie would pop out. And man, I love those brownies. And so I was there and I wanted a brownie, but a quarter was hard to come by. Well, Sis had the answer. She said, watch this. She grabbed a metal hanger and drug it underneath a bunch of the washing machines. Eventually, she pulled out some change. She told me, she said, listen, think about it. Whenever somebody drops a quarter in here and it rolls underneath the machine, what they going to do? They rarely get on their hands and knees to try to get their hands underneath those machines to grab, a dime or a quarter or whatever. And to me, it seemed like a gold mine. Every time I drive by a laundromat, even today, I have the urge to stop. I resist. Trust me, I don't do that. But I talk about the family. I mean, think about my cousin Rick. Okay? There was a time on a family vacation, stopped at a rest stop. Now, this is the 70s, right? And back in those days, in the men's room, there was this gadget at the counter for shoe shining. And it had like 2 rotating brushes on each side of the machine at floor level. One was red, one was black. I have no idea why the colors. But in the middle, there was a rod that extended up maybe 3 foot up towards the wash counter. And on top of that rod was a silver button. And you would put your foot underneath one of the brushes and push the silver button, and the brushes would spin. And voila, you got shiny shoes. Well, we all went to the bathroom, and Rick, he kind of just thought he'd play. And so there's Rick underneath the wash counter, messing with the hoses or the water lines or drains or whatever. And then he saw this shoe shiner. So I guess somewhere there's some way at the bottom you can turn it on too, and he's down there messing with it, making it spin and whatnot. Well, this old man was standing there by the thing, and Rick was turning the thing, and somehow or another the man's shoes were untied or got untied, and the shoe shiner took the man's shoestrings and wrapped it around there about 1,900 times. So this man, his shoes are stuck to the shoe shine machine in a rest area bathroom along some interstate. Well, he's not happy. Rick don't know what to do. Rick's frantically trying to figure out what to do. And so then his father, Art, walks by, sees the man who is by this time is like starting to cuss Rick pretty bad. I mean, calling him some awful names and being really mean to Rick. But again, you got to think about it. This guy's probably in a hurry, and his shoe is tied to a shoe shine machine. Well, Rick's dad looks at it and walks right out of the bathroom, goes to the car. About 10 minutes later, after, well, who knew what happened, but I'm pretty sure the man probably had to cut his shoestrings. Rick comes to the car, all beat up. I mean, really, really beat up. And he's crying. He asks his dad, he says, hey, why didn't you help me there? You got your ass into that, you can get your ass out. That was pretty typical of my family. I mean, and listen, we weren't angels either. I mean, I tried to be, but I guess I didn't get enough Jesus in school. But me and Tony, we would find cigarettes, and hey, we would smoke. I don't even think we inhaled much, but we would smoke. It was cool, right? We felt like the popular kids for just a moment. We used to go to the Saturday matinee in town. Every week our parents would drop us off. And one time, we got caught smoking in the theater at the Saturday matinee. I have no idea. It was some Western or something. Who knows what was on. Thank God it was his dad who came down to the police station and picked us up. I mean, my dad, he lit us up. And as far as I know, my dad never found out about that situation. There was this time that me and Tony were camping with Ricky Clayton. So we were out at Pond Lake. It was our favorite camping place. We had a tent. But, of course, it has to rain. It's raining really hard. So instead of being outside, running around the lake or whatever you might do at a 3-day camp out, we were in the tent smoking. And after a while, someone said they smelled something, like maybe gas. So it turned out that Ricky had a kerosene lamp that had gotten kicked over and had soaked up all the sleeping bags. And we were all sitting in kerosene while we were smoking in the tent. Talk about spontaneous combustion. We was lucky that day. And then, again, getting back to tough and being in the family, listen, you dreaded trips, especially long trips with Pop. You see, back in those days, at least in my family, men farted in public. It wasn't no big deal. I can remember trips where my mom would literally turn green in the front seat from the awful gas attacks. And there were many times when rolling down the window was not an option. And the only thing he would say if someone complained was, "Wasn't me. My farts smell like roses." Pretty sure that wasn't true. I mean, it must have been hell sleeping with him. And my older brothers knew this all too well. They had experienced it themselves. Back in the 60s and early 70s, my older brothers and my father used to have a little race team. And they would tote their race car all over the Southeast. And they would start off racing the fairgrounds at Nashville, which is where I met Marty Robbins when I was 6, which was pretty damn cool, if I can say this for sure. Anyway, one time they were toting their race car up through the mountains of East Tennessee somewhere, and this is before interstate, and it's a pretty long climb. A long drive. I guess they were going to Maryville or Bristol or somewhere, who knows. But my mom used to make them sandwiches and stuff because they acted like gypsies when they were on the road. They would have chicken and like I say, sandwiches and snacks. All came from home because there wasn't enough extra money to stop and have no fancy meal. But they're driving this time, and, well, they pull out the sandwiches, and I guess I have a brother driving, and Papa's sitting in the middle, and their friend Harry Smith was with them. More on Harry Smith later. And so they all pull out the sandwiches, and they're driving up the mountain or whatever, and right when they get the sandwiches open, Pop farts. Listen, it's not pleasant. Harry has his sandwich in his hand. He looks at the sandwich. He looks at my dad. He looks at the sandwich. He looks at my dad, and then chunks the sandwich out the window. That's how bad it was. But being tough also meant being smart. Some folks thought they had the market cornered on smart. My older brothers were always just a bit smarter. I think mostly because they learned from what they saw and experienced. One time, one of my brothers took a trip to Atlanta with a coworker. Now, this coworker had made this trip many times, and he was busy teaching my brother the ropes, as he called it. His name was Steve Begrew, I think, and Steve was pretty smart, but he wasn't as smart as my brother. But anyway, my brother's pretty quiet and listening to him and whatnot. And so they're staying at this motel. Kind of bad part of town in Atlanta. I don't know if there's a good part of Atlanta at those days. But so they walked out of the room, the Coke machine. Steve said, "Listen, watch me. I'm going to show you how this is done. You see that little neighborhood kid down there peeking around the corner? He's waiting for me or someone to put money in that Coke machine. When I start to hit the button, you watch. He's going to start running. And before I can bend down, he's going to grab that Coke and run. Watch the master. I'm going to grab that can with both hands before he gets here." Sure enough, when Steve started to push the button, the kid started running towards him, just like Steve had predicted. Steve bent over quickly and put both his hands over the Coke. The kid didn't slow down. He ran behind Steve, grabbed the wallet out of his back pocket, and disappeared. My brother then thanked Steve and congratulated him on saving that Coke from the kid. Smart, right? Now, Steve really wasn't that smart. One time, he was cheating on his wife, so he took his girlfriend to the darkest, most hidden Italian restaurant in Nashville. Something like Guido's or something. And he asked, for the darkest, backest corner of the restaurant that they could possibly get into. So him and his girlfriend were back in the dark part. I don't know. They were touching noses and God knows what else, when suddenly a bunch of bright lights hit them. Scared the crap out of him. But the restaurant was filming a commercial. They were going to give him a free meal and some other stuff for appearing in their commercial. But in the end, Steve wound up slipping the producer $100 to cut him out of the commercial. Okay. But then there's words, and there were a lot of words and phrases that my dad used when I was a little kid that they were not only foreign to me, they sounded absolutely exotic. Eventually, we'll hear them all. But for today, the word is couth. And he used that word a lot. And the truth is, I never knew what the hell couth was. Just some word that my dad used. And he did love that word. And while he used it to describe various people, he mostly used it to describe my mom and most of her family. So, though I never knew what couth was, the only thing I knew was that neither my mom nor her family had any. And my impression was it was a bad thing. I often wondered if I had any couth. I still wonder to this day. This episode was sponsored by the #1 children's book for adults with 24 original watercolor paintings by the very best artist and illustrator from England, and a story that will mean something to both children and adults. You can search for it on Amazon. It's called Headley Outsmarts the World. Headley Outsmarts the World. And there'll be a link to it on our webpage at broadneckmusic.com, where you can also go for liner notes this episode and all episodes of the Southern Tales podcast. Please go, and you will find more depth, answers to your questions, and you'll definitely find out about our kick-ass theme music from T.R. Crooks, that little band from Paris, Tennessee, recorded back in '77. Our contact email address is stalespodcast@gmail.com. Send me your questions, send me your stories. Maybe if we get enough interesting stuff, we'll have some Southern Tales of your very own stuff and the answers to your questions. Once again, thanks for listening. And you know what? Tell a friend about all the fun we're having on Southern Tales.